At Monarch office, so it's one of the housing buildings. Or mail for just a lot of mail. There was a car bombing. Car accident.
Yeah. That's crazy.
Turkey, the capital of Turkey. Like $10
Not a
the
big
turd. Or the Kurds.
The Kurds, yeah.
Rightfully so. I mean, not rightfully so. Because you never attack someone, but like, that's what I meant. That came out.
Justifiable.
Yeah.
There you go.
Austin,
Yeah.
was it productive for you at all?
Is what productive?
The comments I sent.
So far, yes. Now I have not dove into them yet, but yeah, the brief overview, yes, definitely.
Look, are they due today?
No, they're not due today.
No.
They do.
The revise is due today.
Yeah, the notes.
Oh.
Yeah.
Just sending it to
Oh
someone.
crap. I guess I'm a week ahead.
Which I must do for this class.
Speaking of, did you remind? I sent you last night.
Okay, let me check.
If not, I'll
It
resend
probably went
because my email hasn't been sending to.
first of
You
the
didn't
day,
get
but
mine.
not
I'm
yet.
one of my
Put it out
first time
till
teachers,
Right.
so I'm checking
Fine.
now.
I never
I don't know if
got
it's still linked.
the lady that
I bet it's.
edited.
Oh, never sent you a
We
paper.
met for lunch.
Okay.
She never sent it.
Okay.
But I got the intent of it. So.
All right. Well, we have to. Well, I think at the very end of class today, I will call for people to maybe stop here at the podium and we talk about individual troubles in that way. Because, yeah, I know.
Because I talked to her last week when she was supposed to get it to me, and she said I thought she would get it to me shortly.
Yeah, but it's like led to more fire.
Okay.
But yeah, she knows.
Okay. Her computer broke. Okay. All right. Well, I'll get on this. Okay. But I'll talk because I think there may be a few other cases of it. Although a few have, I think, cleared up in the last 24 hours, and I'll see what I can do. Okay. There we go.
That's horrible.
What, French Revolution?
Can I turn it in and get it off my hand?
Sure. I mean, I'm not going to refuse it. If you want to sit and linger and worry about every I and T, you can do that too.
Being
There's
proactive.
a point in time when it's just best to be done.
Right. There we go. Beginning with your names. Welcome also off campus to HIST3000. What are we? Section 2, I think. I don't know what. Yes, Section 2. Special topics. The French Revolution and Napoleon. Beginning with names on campus, I have Edmund right here, and Cameron right there, Brian, and see John, you off campus, and John, I suggest you get in touch with me because the whole idea of this assignment, this first assignment, is that each student has a referee, and as I was suggesting to you. That I would serve in effect as your referee. So for this first assignment, so go ahead and hit me with an email, and we'll take it from there. Here's Erica, and Dylan, and Dune, and let's see. Andrea said she would not be here. Danielle, however, is here, looking fine. Rihanna,
That's right.
where's Rihanna? She's not here? Okay, I bet she comes in. Fallon is here, and where's Cassidy? Ryan, and Austin, and Joe, and let's see. Jennifer told me she could not be here, so I knew that she and both she and Andrea would not be here. Allison, I don't see. Let's see. People will come in. I just spoke with Lindsay. There's Victor. Amy is right here. Caitlin is here. Let's see, Dennis. Oh, there we go, right in front of me. Robert's right there. How about Isabella? Okay, I don't see her either. So the ones I'm missing right now are Isabella and Allison and Rihanna, Cassidy, and that's it. So 4 that I expected would be here. All right. Now, you know as well as I do that we are at a crucial juncture with the papers. That that a week ago, per schedule, you conveyed your initial draft of the paper to your referee. Today is the day when your referee needs to get that draft back to you, or in any case, his or her comments back to you. And I underline how important it is. I underline how important it is because in order for the person for whom you are the referee to move forward, you need to do your part of the work, to fulfill your part of the bargain. Okay. And bear in mind, I mean, UCCS students, by and large, do not always have an enormous amount of time on their hands. And I was speaking with someone the other day who sets Thursday apart to do homework, at least the bulk of homework, and then the work schedule sits in. So the student in those circumstances who does not receive a paper on Wednesday to work on Thursday is at a real disadvantage. Because, as I say, I mean, I haven't looked into the work activities of you outside of campus, and I'm not sure what everyone is doing, but I think by and large that, you know, people do have other responsibilities who attend UCCS. So keep that in mind as well, how important it is for you to function as a good referee, in other words. And if there are problems, in fact, I just spoke, yes?
If they're not here, do you want us to turn it into you?
No, wait, you mean you don't have...
They're not here to return it back?
Oh.
You submit it back electronically.
It was.
So just scan it. Just like scan it to them.
I know, but it didn't. Were we supposed to do it that way?
You can do it any way you want. I left that open. It wasn't necessarily supposed to be. You could meet and you know, exchange them by hand, hard copy by hand anyway. Well, you know the situation better than I do, and you know, at the end of the hour or at the end of the class, I do want to, you know, call on you to see if maybe we could discuss it on an individual basis, what problems may exist. But in your case, Lindsay, I would say, I mean, is the person more likely, so that you can't contact the person by email?
I can. I didn't want to edit it over the computer. So
Okay.
I printed it out and edited
You printed it out.
We had the option.
Okay, you have the option. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I mean, I don't edit by the computer. What I do is, and you'll see this, I mark up the papers with pencil, more or less in an editorial fashion, and then I type out comments that then are stapled onto the paper as it's returned to you. So I guess I represent a variant of all this. Right. Well, I mean, you could even mail the thing in the time that we have. I'll leave it up to you. If you think the person is more likely to stop by my office to pick up the paper than to arrange a meeting with you to pick up the paper, then we'll do it that way, whichever is best. And if I have the paper, I'll shoot an email to say, hey, I have the paper. Okay? So that could work. And I often just leave a paper out in that file holder outside my office in an envelope, and the student can pick it up that way. Then that would work, if any of the rest of you need to avail yourselves. By the way, I have a good testimony from one among you, Erica, who last week was not here, but who watched the thing on television. And according to Erica, to correct me if I'm wrong, I come through pretty well, my voice, but you do not always come through very well. And the idea is, that's right, you get right up to that microphone. You do your best Elvis Presley imitation and get next to that microphone, and then your words will be heard out in the generality, right, all the way around the world. That's the ambition for our little course here in Colorado Springs, okay? Okay, so thank you for that word to the wise, Erica. Let's take stock of this course so far, what we have done. The guide has been the renowned historian Timothy Tackett, who wrote a book called The Coming of the Terror in the French Revolution. And I think you will agree that he offers a striking analysis of the coming of the terror. On the one hand, of course, ideology is important. There is no question but that the revolution developed patriots in the emphatic sense of the term as it was used in 1789 and in the 1790s and thereafter. And it meant people who believed in the nation as the ultimate source of authority in France, the nation, the people. They believed in popular sovereignty, and they believed that the manner to articulate the authority of the people was to issue a constitution. They were constitutionalists. They had followed, of course, the development of a constitution in the United States. They were interested in constitutional theory, and they added their own ideas about what should be in a constitution. And that's important. In 1789, in 1790, in 1793, in 1794. There was an ideology of patriotism in France. Disagreements, of course, about points of dispute, whether the rights of man should include the rights to some kind of material subsistence or not. That was a point of disagreement, as you saw. But the basic idea that patriotism referred all questions of ultimate power and ultimate authority, all questions of legitimacy to the nation. About that, there was no doubt among the revolutionaries. But of course, there was also a great deal of confusion. Contingent circumstances imposed confusion upon the revolutionaries. No sooner had they seized power, asserted ultimate power in France, in the form of the National Assembly, in the institution of the National Assembly, then the fact of governmental breakdown was upon them. The old regime ceased, and that meant tax collection, tax ceased, not completely, but largely, and tax receipts were diminished. It meant that the administration of justice was a question mark. It meant that the provision of police powers in locality after locality was a question mark. It was just not clear that France had a government, although it had a National Assembly which had set about the work to create one. And of course, the crisis of legitimacy, what Tackett calls the crisis of legitimacy, owes to that basic situation. We are in power, who is in power? And that's I think as good a statement of the paradox as I could issue. Bear in mind also that the change of circumstances wore on the men at the center. And of course, Tackett's focus is really upon the men at the center. Robespierre, Brissot, Desmoulins, the figures in Paris who really dominated political power and political discussion, but in general, what he calls the political elite. In other words, those who were the members of the assemblies and those who were then, in 1792, the members of the National Convention. Okay. So changes of circumstances affected these men and stirred powerful emotion. War fell upon them. Counter-revolution faced them. Many of them entered into an embrace with the urban masses, known as the sans-culottes, but that was not an embrace altogether to the advantage and under the control of the political leadership. Often the urban poor claimed their own influence upon the political leadership. The Jacobins, Maximilien Robespierre, as an example, needed no instruction in intolerance of opposition, but he seems to have gotten a strong push to be violent toward political opponents from his embrace with the Parisian crowds, the Parisian masses, called at the time, at least in English discourse, the mob. There's a great deal to the analysis of Tackett. I think it's a very striking analysis, and needless to say, we've given it a good deal of attention in our discussion so far. But of course, as we looked at it last time, Tackett also supplied us with a narration of events from 1787, when the crisis of revenue was upon the monarchy, until 1794, the death of Robespierre, which marks the end of the so-called Reign of Terror. Tackett's perspective, as I mentioned, upon Paris. He sees the formation of the National Assembly and its conversion into a constituent assembly that took upon itself the task of the issuance of a constitution. He saw the Constitution issued in 1791 and the establishment of the Legislative Assembly in that year. And no doubt there were many revolutionaries who thought that that would just bring the revolution to a close, that that was the equivalent of our creation of government through our Constitution in this country. But that was not the case in France. That was not the case. We saw the establishment of a republic out of growing outrage at the monarch. The Constitution, after all, had created a constitutional monarchy, and the monarch, it turned out, did not want to play his role. He tried to escape his role. People forgave but did not forget, and as evidence mounted that he continued to conspire against the Constitution that he had sworn to support, fury developed, and France dispensed with the monarchy and put in its place a republic, and as you know, executed the king, and some months later would execute the queen. So the National Convention is now the body at the center of authority in Paris, and it is full of radical Jacobin leadership, and the main figure of that being, of course, Maximilien Robespierre. It's the National Convention that prosecuted the war. In its opening phase, it's the National Convention that staved off the counter-revolution. Now today, we look at all of this from a different perspective, because we've traded in one overview for another. The overview that we had is a narrative from 1787 until 1794, whose focus is upon Paris, the center of power. The narrative that we have today is altogether different. Different in part because it extends the story up until 1799 through the period of government that was known as the Directory, and that's finest to the good. This is a course, after all, that is going to lead all the way up in its chronology to Napoleon and the fall of Napoleon in 1815, and at some point we had to cross the bridge beyond the Reign of Terror. But there's more to the story, and there's more to what distinguishes Peter McPhee as an historian from Timothy Tackett. There's a shift of perspective here, from Paris out into the rural areas of France, out into the countryside. His focus is upon the peasantry. This was, after all, a nation of peasants. 85%, 88%, depends upon how you count. The overwhelming majority of the French men and women in 1789, in 1794, and all the way through Napoleon were, after all, of the peasant class. So, to a large degree, what we will do today is begin to retrace the narrative that we have from Timothy Tackett, but from a different point of view. And that concerns the peasantry. It would be fair to say that, given that when the elections began to be held for the Estates General, there were 40,000 separate municipalities at the base of an electoral pyramid. 40,000. And after the Assembly had done its work of redistricting and drawing boundaries, which it did with almost manic precision, there were 44,000 communes, the great majority of them, of course, villages throughout rural France. I think it's fair to say at the outset that what Peter McVie tends to find is a common pattern, but with enormous variation. Everyone was concerned about the disposition of land. Everyone took interest in the elimination of what were called feudal dues that pertained to the land by the National Assembly on the 4th of August, 1789. That caught peasant interest, needless to say. There may have been a lapse of several days between an action that the Assembly took and its arrival in a village somewhere in Alsace or in Normandy, but sooner or later the news arrived and everyone could see that that was an important step. So there are to a great degree common points of focus for the French peasantry in whatever region of France based upon what the National Assembly does. And yet that common focus doesn't set a standard by which everyone simply adhered. And we will see considerable variety. Just to anticipate the point that's bound to come up in our discussion, the way in which the French peasantry, Catholic in their overwhelming majority, responded to the legislation that bore upon the church. 1790, the parish priest is supposed to have sworn an oath to the government that took precedence over the oath to Rome, and that created real waves in the countryside. How a given village responded, well, that depends on the given village. But I think you can see that it would be an issue of immense importance. Just think of the immensity of the research project. I mean, Peter McPhee has not been to every one of these 40+ thousand villages, some of which are no longer there or no longer villages. And to some extent, he rests upon the work of other scholars who have worked on village life in this or that region of France during this period. But to a considerable degree, Peter McPhee has been out there and sampled the local wine, if you know what I mean, and seen what the village looks like from the standpoint of whatever documentation has been left since the Revolution. So it's really an amazing basis of research on which this book is written. I thought for the first several minutes, I'd like to just turn with you to some crucial statements in the introduction where he sets before us what it is that he thinks he can do on the basis of all of this research into rural France. Turn with me, please, to page 2. All right? All right. The French Revolution was, however, one of those rare periods in history, I read there from the middle paragraph, when ordinary people, peasants, laborers, tradespeople, the indigent, felt sufficiently confident to express themselves directly to the authorities. He goes on to speak about the use of records of local government. He goes on to refer to legal actions that left some imprint of the interest of whoever was engaged, right? And if it was a peasant, so much the better. He goes on to speak about the language of protest. And the assemblies received protests from this or that village throughout the entire period. This book seeks to use such evidence and much else besides for the people who lived in mainland France's country towns and villages. It investigates the ways in which the revolution affected daily life, both in terms of the impact of legislation and of the ways in which people made and experienced changes to their own lives. So the revolution has an effect, but the people are not altogether passive. That's the conception to begin with. Whether and how the lived experience of the revolution, war, and sweeping revolutionary change in France, 1788 to 1799, transformed cultures and society, even daily life itself. All right? What would be the opposite position? What would it mean? What would it entail to say no to that question? Did war and sweeping legislative change transform cultures and society, even daily life itself? What would it mean to say no to that? Can you imagine saying no to that? You can't. Okay? Why not? Amy.
Because it seems
Close,
that
closer to the mic. Closer to the mic. Right, we're going to be exemplary on that today. There we go.
It seems that it would be overlooking the vast majority of the experience of the revolution if you
Okay.
don't assume that war, through
Okay.
conscription, the legislative reforms which
Yeah.
changed the makeup of the way
Okay.
that the society identified as a citizen instead of
Okay.
a subject.
So the idea out on the farm, nothing really changed, that doesn't have any purchase for you.
No.
Okay, okay. Yes, Joe.
How do you pronounce the cahiers? Cahiers?
Cahier.
Cahier?
Yeah, those are lists.
Right. The list of grievances that
Yeah.
the king solicited.
Doléances. Mhm.
Yeah, he made the point that once those were completed in the town halls and wherever and sent in, that the peasants kind of thought, okay, everything's going to be addressed. It's time to rock.
Yeah.
And that's
okay.
when life changed.
All right. I mean, think about this. Who had ever solicited the opinion of a village about what was good and bad in their life? Who had ever done that? No one. And all of a sudden, Louis, when he agreed to call the Estates General, to convene the Estates General in 1789, specified that there should be an airing of grievances throughout the land. And so, I mean, that doesn't make every list of grievances in some way easy to use, but it is absolutely remarkable that he did that. Yes?
What was behind that thought of wanting these grievances? Was it his way of getting in touch with the people, getting on their good side? Like,
Well, I think he had a very immediate and instrumental aim, and that is that what will come in is that in this tug of war that I'm involved in with the nobility, they side with me and not with the nobility. I mean, he thought that he would get pure endorsement of his position against the nobility and that he would be able to use this to force their concession of their tax privilege, that they would begin to pay taxes that time out of mind they had not paid because the groundswell of opinion would demonstrate to them that they had to. That's what he thought. Yes?
Even greater representation of the regime, even some of them where the error was overseen by the local noble, where they wouldn't voice an opinion. They
Yeah.
were scared. The change even came to them, even though they didn't ask for it.
Yeah.
The countries, no, we stayed quiet because we don't want repercussions, but hey, we benefit anyhow.
Good point. And your author, to echo what Brian has said, your author does indicate that you can't just pick up every village list of grievances and say, oh, well, this is what they thought, because there were various influences upon the way in which that list was drawn up. Okay? To say nothing of the fact that as it raised in the pyramid of the elections of 1789, often at the district level, a town lawyer or merchant would take a look at this and say, that's ridiculous, we're not going to include that. So that often the district, in effect, erased what the village had done. So they really are. So you can't just, in other words, you can't just say, well, let's see what was going on in the district. You can't say that. I'm reminded years ago, and I was in Germany, not France, although I think I told you once I was in the part of Germany that had been France in this era because of annexation. And I was also working on village archives on a far different subject. And this was in the German state of Prussia. Prussia was the authority throughout this part of Germany, in the time that I was concerned with. And I would go to the village, and then I would find it at what was in effect the county archive. I'd find copies of the document. Think of the poor scribes who had to write them. And then I'd find them in Düsseldorf, which was what they called the Regierung, in other words, the regional, the provincial government. And I literally traveled into East Germany because then the archives had the seat of power was, this was when there was East Germany, right? I'm not telling you a fairy tale. So I went to a city called Merseburg, not to Berlin, but to Merseburg, to find the archive that had all of these things, and I would find these little comments about the village all the way up top. Now, what was different about my experience was that I found a remarkable convergence between the records kept up top and the records that were kept in the village archive, because that's the way the Prussian ministry operated. But your author is pointing out that in 1789 in France that was not the case, and that often up top they excised what people had put in at the bottom, which makes research difficult. Yeah.
So the Soviets didn't destroy all that stuff.
No, not all of it. I mean, it's a complicated. I mean, I don't know how the exact documents that I had contact, that I looked at in Merseburg, I don't really know how they got to Merseburg. But what was going on in Berlin at the end of the war, and really far from the end of the war, because the Soviet Union, by the middle of 1943 was really on the push toward Berlin, which of course was the seat of government, and where in general you could have expected to find these documents. There was an immense transfer of all kind of documentation out into the countryside, for the most part within the eastern province of Brandenburg. And how it came to Merseburg, weiß der Kuckuck. The cuckoo bird knows. I have no idea. Okay, but in any case, I found it, which was good for me. Yeah. So he goes on. I mean, the premise here, in effect, what he expects to find is changes of this magnitude are not going to happen in Paris and have no effect out on the land. That at some point, the authority of Paris is felt on the land, which doesn't mean that people simply have to bend the knee and accept it. They would accept it or adapt it to their own purposes, or in some cases reject it. There was, after all, some counter-revolution in France, in some parts of France, in 1793. So it's a complicated story, and it's based on complicated research. All right. So he goes on to talk about tax schedules, civil registers, conscription records. Those things you find in abundance. But what do they say about? They kind of establish the outline of an individual life. So-and-so paid taxes, so-and-so was married, so-and-so was born, so-and-so passed away. But if you want to get in detail and find out how people took something like revolutionary land legislation, how they took the new legislation that bore upon the Catholic Church, well, then you have to look elsewhere. And let's look to the bottom of page 3. This is an interesting statement. Perhaps because my own family background is that of country towns and farming, I have always, he's an Australian, by the way, McPhee. I have always been more intrigued by how rural people lived and worked. Although I work in an elite institution and inhabit a large city, he's interested in how rural people make their own histories. So he's interested in decentering the Revolution of France, to get away from the center, Paris, not to deny its influence or importance, but to see how this really affected people and how they affected it at the local level. I used to work in wheat harvests when I was 17, 18. I wonder if I ought to convert myself into an historian of rural life. Is that what McPhee is saying? That some place in his roots is an interest in farms. Last time I was on a farm, my friend was putting up limestone fences, limestone fence posts, and one of them was so heavy I could barely hold it in place, much less lift it into place. But so I don't know that. I think I'm better as an academic than I would have been a farmer, but still. Anyway, let's look on. Page 4. Towards about 8 lines from the bottom of this, he's been talking about another historian whose name is Sutherland. And he distances himself from Sutherland's conclusion that in the countryside, if you found anything at all, you found royalists and counter-revolution. He says this book will investigate the ways in which, even in communities hostile to the revolution, the patterned rituals of daily life were transformed by the very experience of resisting revolutionary upheaval. In other words, you can, in life and in history, or in life as a part of history, push against some force that you dislike, but perhaps unbeknownst to you, it influences you from behind. Does that make any sense? That in your very moment of harshest resistance to something, you can also become, in a way, open to it. Another way to look at it is this. The old regime was gone. You're for the nobility? Which nobility? I see none. You're for the old church the way it was? I see some priests who took the oath and some priests who didn't, and a lot of trouble about that. So you enter into the melee to fight about that. You really think you've established the old regime? That's not the old regime. The old regime had no knowledge of that melee. You get my point. And I think that's what he wants to, he wants to say that there are levels, that sometimes people oppose something but open themselves in a way that they cannot understand in the moment. Interesting. Let's go on. Page 5. Well, just the bottom of the, I just have one question that it really sums up what his angle of research is. About 10 lines from the bottom. How did rural and small town men and women adopt, adapt, and resist change from Paris? Not accept, because they had no interest in wholesale acceptance of what the Parisians sent their way, but they could adopt it, which suggests a possibility of change, alteration, adapt it, which suggests an even greater possibility of change, and resist it, which happened in some cases. Right? Woe to the assembly that said, all right, here is the compensation that has to go to the Seigneur, in other words, the Lord, for the dues that we have abolished. Who paid them? Did anyone ever pay them? I mean, they saw a land transfer. Everything else was hilarious from their angle. Who's collecting that? On what authority? Then the Jacobins in 1793 did themselves a favor when they said, away with that. If they've got the land, it's their land. That's all there is to it. There is no compensation. Let's go on. Page 7. Page 7. I'm trying to, you see, I go through this. It may seem, well, lingering on statements in an introduction of a book. It seems to me we really need to get to know this book. Yeah?
I see that's where some of the problem. They didn't have good communication between Paris and some of the countries. They didn't speak the same language.
Yeah, that was a trouble. That was trouble.
But for the local community, all they saw was, okay, the noble owned the land. Now a rich landlord from town bought all the land.
Yeah.
Maybe we don't even have access to that land anymore than we used to. So they didn't see Paris as...
That could be, although that varied also from region to region. It was often a large landowner or a bourgeois from the city who, swept out to these auctions and bought up parcels. But often a peasant of any substance whatsoever could buy in, and often they pooled resources, bought a slew of them, church properties, for example, and parceled them out. So it became...
They set up their own government, like, oh, we're supposed to set up our own government, here's our government. So Paris law would come, and they'd be like, well, our government said this, so we're doing this.
Right, right. There was often just refusal, particularly on this question of the land. Particularly on this question of the land. Let's see, page 7. Yeah, he goes on about the archives. He talks about the richness of the French archives for which the revolution is in large measure responsible. That's interesting. As an old historian of Germany, I know how much of German history is accessible because beginning in about the 19th century, they became absolutely fixated upon the question of the keeping documents. And yes, some were obviously destroyed at the end of the Second World War, but a lot were kept. So, I mean, Germany is in general a rich field for that kind of research. Not only is there a danger in reading these sources as unproblematic records of past reality, however, there is another danger in assuming that they represent what it was like to live through this revolution. In other words, read these with care, read these with what You know, at the university you learn as critical thinking, a critical perspective. Take, for example, the issue of silence. What if something major happens, like the execution of the Girondins? At the village level, that goes unmentioned. Why? No interest? Support? Or just a habit of silence? Self-protection. You say the wrong thing about Brissot at the wrong moment, the executioner could swing your way too. So you figure it out. You figure it out. I mean, that's the situation the historian is so often in. You know, why is there silence? So if you're looking at a village municipal record, I might look at a club in the district, a political club in the district, to see who in this village was a member and what the effect of the purge of the Girondins nationally had at the local level. And then I'm starting to get somewhere. But simply to read a document like that and say, well, they didn't care about the Girondins, that could be quite wrong. You can misread the silence. I mean, think of this as a labor of research. Think of Peter McPhee. I mean, he really is, like Tackett, a famous historian. And think of this. I mean, he's written numerous books about peasant life in France around this era. You know, he's so interested in the environment, and we'll get to that. You know, the environmental history of France in this era. Think of what a nice life he carved out for himself, right? And he probably had this passion when he was in school, when he was in graduate school, and did well and so forth. Set himself up, probably wrote a clever dissertation. And what he gets to do is spend his life zipping around the French countryside from village to village, you know, where no doubt there are stories told and wine to be sampled and bread and cheese, each taste better than the last. And that's really what he did. That's what he did. That's why this book, how this book comes in. And he read you know, everything he could get his hands on the subject. So it's an interesting career. It's interesting to think of how it is that a career feeds into a book like this that is based upon such a mountain of research. Pardon me? What?
I'm going to write a book about it.
All right, you write a book about it. There you go. There you go. No, or, you know, really, it's always there. I was speaking with a graduate last night who was telling me about a local archive that I'd never heard of. And she was just brimming with enthusiasm. I thought, well, go for it. You know, there's all this material, go for it. Enjoy yourself. Because it's, you know, you don't have to travel to France to feel the stimulation of archival research. Let's look on. Yeah, then he talks about, yeah, he's right. He talks about local histories, and you've got that. From 1790s on, there was often some local scribe who thought, I think I'll just set this all to writing. And I know that from the history of Germany. It's the first thing you do when you go to work in a region. There are books from, here's a book from 1840, here's a book from 1860, here's a book from 1890. Here's a, you know, and it's some local school teacher or collector, antiquarian who has gathered a bunch of material, and some of it is just, you know, just one anecdote after the other, and you can hardly trust it. But some of it offers real, thoughtful insight into, and you have to, you know, gauge it for plausibility, into what happened in some, you know, remote region or some, you know, remote village in Germany or here in France. And he's saying you've got to read all that stuff, but some of it you have to take with a grain of salt, right? I mean, if you read a book that says from 1799 that says, and of course we all applauded when Robespierre was put to death. Well, there's a vested interest in saying in 1799 that we all applauded when Robespierre was put to death. It'd be like a local history in a German village in 1946 that says we all applauded when Hitler fell. Not all of them did. Okay. So let's go on. Page 9. Page 9. Now, I can't remember what. Oh yeah, he's talking then about the various materials. You've got to go through. You've got to know what the center was doing. You know what the laws, the proclamations, and so forth of the assembly. You have to know that in order to gauge this reaction, what people do in the countryside. But he talks about other kinds of documents by the end of that paragraph. He talks about, for example, letters and petitions that came into the assemblies and were kept. Well, you go through those, kept by here's this department, here's that department, here's the other department, and then all of a sudden you've got to figure out the handwriting. That can be a challenge. You've got to figure out the handwriting. But yeah, then you're in business. And then he goes on to speak about the family courts, okay, where the revolution did set up these new courts, justices of the peace. So people would come into court, let's say a peasant who challenges the seigneur on whose land he has lived, the seigneur who resists the peasant. Well, through their testimony, you can get an idea of the way in which each side looked at this. And then, of course, all of these municipalities that sooner or later elected a municipal government, as Brian pointed out. Sooner or later they would, in their great majority, and there would be some deliberations, and there would be some records of those deliberations, and you're in business. You're in business as an historian. And that, I think, is the point of reading with such care this introduction by Peter McFay. You have an idea of how he put himself in business, what he set out to do as a researcher, and what he found when he actually hit the ground in the way of archival material. And believe me, often when you find archival material, you think, this isn't what I wanted. This isn't what I thought I would find. But if you just save yourself from panic and say, well, what have I found? Then, you can move ahead. Because sometimes what you find frustrates your expectation, but it's just as valuable in its own way. And that's research. You just keep pushing, keep pushing, keep pushing, keep pushing. Right now I'm working on a subject altogether different. I'm working on journalists who wrote in Germany in the West, 1950s and 1960s. And in the last 2 days, I figured out that 2 of them, whose backgrounds I didn't know, had been members of the Nazi Party back when there was a Nazi Party. And I found that out just by pushing, pushing, pushing. And it makes the thing more interesting. It makes the thing more interesting if you push and you can give context that you never imagined you would be able to give. So, I mean, McPhee is exemplary. I mean, model your career on him. Okay. Yeah. By the way, yeah, that was nice when you said Carrier, because I told you at the beginning, if you're going to be irritated by French historians who write in English but use French terms, then you're going to spend the entire semester in a state of advanced irritation, because they do that. And I don't know why they do that, but they do that. It's somehow a contagion.
The French language has panache.
There we go. There we go. That's the spirit. And I don't think that the Germans do that quite as often, or maybe I'm just insensitive to it. But yeah, we use terms like Führer, the leader, or something like that. But Wehrmacht, we don't say armed forces. But I don't think we do that as often. But I think there's this, infatuation with the language that we have. Anyway, I want to really dig in. I want to really dig into this book and see what this historian has done. And you'll have to bear with this. I think that it means looking closely at passages in which he uses evidence and draws conclusions. But I think you'll get an idea of his subject if we do that. It's a little bit of painstaking work, but I'm up for it. I'm older than you are, so you need to be up for it too, okay? Okay. Yeah, so the first chapter here, describing the old regime. And, he's working on these cahiers de doléances, the lists of grievances, right? And these are produced, of course, before anybody knows that a revolution is going to come out of this, because these are produced at some point in the late winter or early spring of 1789. The king has called for them. So village upon village upon village upon village meet. Now, the trouble with these documents from the village level, the trouble with the use of these documents at the village level, is that often the village has received a kind of template from the local town and just imitated it, used it. So that what you get from the village in some cases is an echo of what they say in the town. Well, that's no good. From time to time, there's a factor of intimidation, right? The agent of the local seigneur says, that does not go in to your list of grievances. That is not a grievance that you will send along. And where there's evidence of that, of course, that distorts the documentation. And even there can be a local elite. I mean, if this is a town and not a village, the local government official who says, well, I'll take this into my hand. You people cannot even write. And so we get a point of view skewed by whose point of view it is. Okay? All right. And of course, I pointed out earlier, at the district level, often, and then, you know, this idea that, well, the Third Estate was dominated by the bourgeoisie. These were, in the end, merchants and professional men, government officials of one kind or not, lawyers. I mean, that truism starts to kick in at the district level, because they would look at these grievances from the peasantry and say, this is bizarre. This is the last thing we're going to send along. Because they had their own grievances that they wanted to highlight and had no interest in this unsavory mass of peasant grievances. All right? So there's trouble using it. But McPhee says, given all of that, you'd think that the whole thing is a garbled mess and you can't find headway. But he does find that these grievances, and 44,000 of them were, you know, in some manner collected, that these grievances do sound the themes that you might expect. They're against the seigneurial dues. They're against this entire, what in Paris would be called the feudal regime. They don't, the peasant does not want to pay all these dues, all these rents in cash and kind, all these labor services known as the corvée, all these banalités where you take your grain to the mill to be ground into flour and you leave some of the flour there. You take your sacks of flour to the Lord's oven and you have it baked into bread and you leave some of the bread. They didn't want that. Or grapes to be pressed into wine, or olives to be pressed into olive oil. That, they're called banalités. Those were a source of trouble, a thorn in their side. So despite everything we said about the way this documentation can be skewed, in fact, the peasants, it does, when you read enough of them, it does come across that the peasantry did not want that. They wanted the Estates General to convene. And there's a certain amount of resentment of the crown. They had this idea that the crown had let things get out of control when it came to finance. No one was a Republican. No one called for the execution or the exile or anything of the kind of Louis XVI. Out of the question. I mean, almost impossible, as impossible to conceive as something can be impossible to conceive. But they don't like this idea that, you know, things are amiss in royal finance. Okay. And we have to bear in mind that all of these are written up before the revolution, that they don't have any idea any more than anyone else what will come. Okay? So let's look at some passages. Let's dig in. Page 16. Page 16. There's a nice map of France, the provinces in the 1780s. Look at the difference, by the way, between that map and the one, I know I'm going off on a tangent, but look at page 68, this mania for precise boundaries. You know, alteration of old provincial names into new departmental ones. Look at that.
Hackett actually had them side by side in his book.
Oh, he did? Okay. All right. I'd forgotten that. But look at it. I mean, if you think, well, I'm a member of such and such a region, I mean, look at how that changes. Look at how that changes. It's much more precise. I mean, they're more or less of similar size and so forth, and as a result of what the assembly did. Pardon me?
Wasn't that the intention? Change their identity.
Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, there is something, there's a little bit of 1984 in what the assembly was setting out to do. You call yourself this, but now you need to call yourself that. Okay? Yeah. Anyway, let's look at page 16, where we were. So these various districts, an analysis of 389 parish cahiers by Peter Jones. I wondered if he needed a new prescription for his eyeglasses afterwards. Shown that seigneurial dues and banalités explicitly criticized in 40%, 36%, and 27%, respectively. So, and the paragraph goes on with that kind of information. Pressure though there was, peasants made it known that they did not want these dues. In this case, either the seigneurial dues, like so much cash, so much payment in kind, but also these requirements that you use the mill or the wine press or whatever it was. They did not want it. And the sentence at the end of the paragraph is just plain cute. In stark contrast, 84% of noble cahiers were simply silent on the whole matter. It was not an issue for them. They anticipated that would and should continue. Okay. Now here, let's get into this. He talks about the topic sentence of the next paragraph. By the way, I told you that you could skim some of this, or should skim some of this. You're supposed to use good topic sentences. I assume your referees have been checking those. Historians are supposed to use it too. That's, in this kind of writing, the marker of main ideas. Okay. He talks in the topic sentence, the boldness of vulnerable rural people was at times startling. The Cahiers of Silly-en-Moltien. Okay. We're told where that is, 50 kilometers northeast of Paris. They inserted an article from which two nervous village notables promptly dissociated themselves. That's pretty, the cuteness just grows in all of this. We have nothing to do with this. What advantage for the public good if the hunting codes and feudal dues were abolished, that there were no banalités, in a word, that the French regained their liberty? In other words, why would it be good to abolish all these obligations that have weighed upon the peasantry? They should continue to weigh upon the peasantry, as far as the two of us are concerned. From the village of Pont-sur-Seine in Champagne, a seigneur's agent wrote to his master, "In vain I've done everything I can to exclude from the cahier the articles on the abolition of banalités, of the right to hunt and other seigneurial dues. The intention and the tenacity of the people are immovable on this question, and it is impossible to dissuade them because they have been given the right to express their grievances." All right, so a seigneur's agent, how do you imagine that? How do you imagine this, the event unfolding that prompted this letter to the master? How do you imagine it? They've met in the church or somewhere. I mean, how many possibilities would there be? It's not as though they had a rec center, all right? So they've met in the church. And what's happened? What's the agent there for? Huh?
He's supposed to record the grievances.
All right, he's supposed to record the grievances and make sure that they go in which direction?
Towards the nobles, towards what his master wants to hear.
Okay, what his master wants to hear. And he's been an abject failure. So this letter is, Don't hit me, don't hit me. You know, because the master has expected a result and he's not delivered it. What's the right to hunt, by the way, as we go through these grievances? What is the right to hunt?
To obtain your own food.
Pardon me?
To obtain your own food.
Okay, all right. Now,
Farming, agriculture.
okay. If I use the word poaching, which is, of course, in English, an English word, what does that word say to you?
Hunting illegally.
Hunting illegally. Okay, I go on your land and I want to shoot a rabbit so I can have something to eat, a deer or whatever. Okay. Now, where may the Lord hunt? Anywhere. Yeah.
I was going to say, you have to get permission from the pastor to hunt on his land.
Okay, okay. You have to get permission from the Lord. The Lord can be a nobleman. The Lord can be the church. It can be royal domains. It can be a rich man from the town who's bought into some land. But in any case, they can hunt, and they can hunt on your land. You can't hunt, period. So, which creates the poaching issue, because people sometimes like to poach, or need to poach. Okay, let's look on, page 19. The role of seigneurs in administering justice was a particular concern in the province of Berry, where the parish of Lévé, like many others, simply asked that, quote, seigneurial justice be abolished and those called to justice instead plead before the closest royal judge. Simple. They prefer the king's court to the noble's court. Rural folk were under no illusions that the primary purpose of the seigneurial courts was to maintain the property and privileges of the nobility and the church. He goes on to talk about how many there were. In one district, Sénéchaussée, Saint-Jean d'Angély, 171 seigneurial courts for its 146 parishes. So in other words, it wasn't that there was no justice. It was that it wasn't any good. And I love the statement down here, about 6 lines down. A peasant maxim of the day was that a bad arrangement is better than a good trial. That reminds me in East Germany, where I traveled a few times. Well, the time I mentioned, I traveled a few times when East Germany was still East Germany. And the statement was, better 15 years in jail than 2 years without connections. The idea is, if you're going to make it in East Germany, you just need to know people. You know, take jail, but don't lose your connections. Anyway, let's look on page 20. Yeah, this has to. What did the parish priests want? That's a good question, because the whole idea was, Louis had the idea that you stack the first estate with parish priests and not just let the bishop and the archbishop decide everything, because they're more inclined to favor the reform. All right. As members of a corporate privileged body, parish priests envisioned a rejuvenated feudal order under the auspices of a Catholic monopoly of worship and morality. All right? There's no endorsement here of the idea of, for example, toleration. Right? The one true faith is the one true faith. Makes sense. As commoners by birth, however, they were also ominously sympathetic to the needs of the poor, the opening of positions, including the church hierarchy, to men of talent. All right, so their sympathies are not all some of their sympathies are in line with the bishop and the archbishop, but not all of them. Okay, so if the cahier, if the list of grievances comes from the parish priest or an assortment of parish priests, then look what you get. Yeah, so it goes on to talk about this basic issue as regarding the parish priests. One of the things that I really like about this historian is, you remember when we got into that, you read that volume of the global perspective, and we talked about how globalization is this buzzword today. Everyone is concerned about globalization, and therefore historians have stepped to, and we have produced a global perspective, in this case on the French Revolution, right? I mean, if you'd asked me what was a global perspective on the French Revolution when I was in graduate school, I might have gone blank. But here, you know, you got a lot of material about worldwide trade and French colonies and the French in Egypt that, you know, I would have been pretty hazy about when I was studying this subject in graduate school. The point is that historians ask new questions in part based upon the interests around them. Well, since I was in graduate school, the environment became an interest around historians in the world at large, environmentalism, and I submit to you, you've got a nice environmental history here. Because what's the deal with, say, the use of wood, timber, right? What's the deal? I mean, there are forests. Who gets the wood?
The peasants were upset because industries would come in and cut down all the trees that they were using for
All right.
firewood and construction and power
Good
their
point.
factories.
Excellent point. Excellent point. I mean, think of that. So, I mean, it's not, I mean, there's a little bit of environmentalism in the peasant grievances. That is, well, you remove the trees and you have erosion, and they're concerned about that, okay? They're concerned about erosion. But the major concern is why this monopoly of resources? You know, industry comes in. These are royal woods. These are noble woods. These are church lands. Industry comes in. They get their access. They arrange their access. It may be that they're, you know, some kind of a, you know, a foundry, and they're using the wood for the fire to work products of iron, and we get nothing. I mean, that too then is a grievance. That too is a grievance because they need the wood for their homes. They need it for, you know, for cooking, for warmth and so forth, and they perceive this monopoly. So of course they go out on these lands, you know, under cover of night, and of course that creates a stink in the locality, and there are trials and punishments and so forth, and this becomes an issue. This becomes an issue. Makes sense, doesn't it? I mean, sometimes of a cold winter night when I want to put a fire in the chimney, sometimes I notice that I have too little kindling. And I look for little patches of land, although I live in Colorado Springs, an urban area, where I could pick up a little something that's fallen to the ground. I suppose it's land of the, you're not going to dial 911 on this, are you? But that's the idea. You know, you need something, and so you go out on the sly, more or less, and you take it. And that's what the peasants do here with this land. I don't think the city of Colorado Springs would go after me on that anyway. But one more issue in this initial chapter, and this has to do with these lists of grievances. In the towns, there's a real difference between the perspective of tradespeople and merchants. And that surfaces in these lists of grievances. And what is that real difference? How are they bound to see things differently? Tradespeople, what's their basis of organization? Guild, exactly. And what does a guild do? Okay, right. Regulates. Yeah, Victor.
Protects you against inferior work.
Okay, it regulates prices and it regulates production standards. And it regulates the market in the sense that someone who is not a master of whatever it is, cabinet making or blacksmith or whatever, cannot simply come in and set up shop, okay? At least in the locale where the guild is centered. So there's an interest in regulation. What's the merchant interest? They want to uphold this regulation? Not always. They're interested in free trade. I mean, they're more caught up in this regional or national or even international circulation of goods to buy and to sell. And if yes,
You say that the merchants are more interested in the exchange of ideas as well than the guild might be?
could be, could
such as
be.
new technologies or just policies or whatever?
Technologies altogether. That is, it makes no sense to a merchant that if he knows how to produce textiles better than and can sell them, at a cheaper rate than the local guild, why the local silk weaver or weaver of woolen textile should have this monopoly? So there's a set in a set in divergence of interests. Yeah.
So the Eden Treaty, the merchants were all for it, to get cheaper
Right.
goods, the tradespeople were like,
Yeah. Exactly. The Eden Treaty and the controversy over the Eden Treaty of 1786 is an anticipation of all of this stink at the at the level of the city or of the small town. I mean,
Walmart.
pardon?
So it's like Walmart.
All right, it's like Walmart. Exactly. It's like Walmart, and the small retailer goes out of business, and people buy their their shoes and their appliances or whatever it is at Walmart. Exactly. I mean, Walmart's an extreme example, although maybe history will produce yet more extreme examples in the future. Maybe in the future we will all be employees of Walmart. I will be called a Walmart professor, and my students will be called Walmart students. Let me think about it. I mean, really, just in the span of your lifetime, right? However many years you have been on the earth. I mean, you must have become attached to some form of small business, whether it was just a cafe, a hamburger joint, a shoe store, a shoe repair shop, whatever it was. And then it went out of business. And, the hamburger joint has given way to Five Guys and Smash Burger and, whatever. But we're in an age where I think that passes without a great deal of comment, maybe some regret, but without a great deal of comment. It seems almost inevitable that should happen. But why would that seem inevitable in 1789? The guilds had their prerogative to control, regulate, trade, production standards, and so forth, time out of mind. Tradition had secured it, and all of a sudden, the merchants claim, and they will push this through the National Assembly, that there really ought to be free trade, and that's anathema. That's just out of the question. Yes.
There are parallels in the contemporary day. I used to go up to Jackson, Wyoming quite a lot to ski
Okay.
and whatnot.
Okay.
And up until about
Well, be closer to the
2000
mic.
Up until about
They wanna hear
2000, it
this.
was entirely a locals town.
Yeah, yeah.
And then all of a sudden, big money came in, Harrison Ford, whatnot. And now everything in that town is chain.
Yeah.
There's very little, and the
Well, there you
local
go.
people who still live there hate it.
My life has involved a lot of driving around in the Midwest. And you develop this knowledge of, where there's a good, you'll drive 150 extra miles for a cheeseburger, believe me. And I can remember there was a great place for cheeseburgers, the best ever in Sitka, Kansas. You ever hear of that place? Never heard of Sitka, Kansas, have you? There used to be a button you could buy that said, "Where in the hell is Sitka, Kansas?" But one time I went through and it had gone. But there was a Subway in the next town for consolation. Well, I mean, I'm being jocular about this, but I'm also being jocular about this at a time when it's everywhere, and I don't think it excites the kind of the kind of upset that it excited in 1789, where people thought that tradition. I mean, it would be as though there was some state of Kansas traditional right that rested with that cheeseburger stand, it would be, and that Subway sandwiches had somehow defeated them in court or something like that. You'd have to imagine the enormity of this. Anyway, let's come back at 3 minutes after 5, or excuse me, 5 minutes after 3, and 3 minutes after 5. You'll be long gone. 5 minutes after 3 and continue this, okay? Continue this.
I just want to pay for college, so I don't care when I work. So,
How early are they?
It was a bummer too, man. There's this little place called the Jay's Sportsman's Cafe. It was this hole in the wall joint. The whole block has been torn down.
See, that's,
All fancy chain restaurants.
20-hour days
Used to love to go in there and get trout and eggs for breakfast.
If you don't worry about it.
I don't.
Where do you go?
I'm at
I'm
Melton.
headed home.
I printed out, oh, you are? I printed out a bunch of stuff, and I think I actually forgot to bring my hard copy of the notes. and
It's
stuff.
just the same.
It's just whatever I need to do, so.
Okay.
But yeah, I enjoyed your.
It's still kind of just a
paper,
dot.
so.
There's definitely, so like,
We'll see you later. Have fun.
Okay.
again, like, just driving across town. 5-minute drive. So like, my girlfriend's parents live in Denver, so we go up I-25 to Denver. And like, it takes an hour just to get from here to Monument almost, and then it's like, okay, like you're just gridlock traffic every single time. They just there needs to be another way. Like, I will deal with 5 years of construction than what it is now.
When it was 2 lanes, not even long ago, it was hell. Like, it used to take me an hour.
Hear people go in there to
Well,
meet
what's the
or
gambling
doing
place?
whatever.
That's
and
not-
I have no idea where this place is.
Oh, wow.
Like, no, on I-25. It's crippled.
Yeah, like they
No,
have
it's on I-25.
new 3D printers and what else do they have? Like they have a bunch of stuff.
Oh, okay.
Thing that they call the Willbot,
Yes,
but
like
it's really just an
Frames,
iPad
Monument, Castle.
connected to the
So
site
once we get to Castle,
with
it's
a
like,
remote
oh,
control.
fine.
It's pretty cool.
Yeah,
But it's still.
It's funny
not
because
what
it
I
goes up lanes,
expected
but
when I heard the name.
Yeah.
Because I thought it was going to be able to talk
I am,
with
I got
like
excited.
AI or something. But I was a little disappointed with the iPad. on the
Okay,
site.
sounds good. Yeah, see if that works. Yep, thank you. No, I usually don't do that, and I actually find it.
Well, I saw
I
it
know.
after
This is like
and
normally I'm so close.
I might still go back.
In terms of onward and crash, already feeling it, and it's
Right. So I'm like right now, I didn't think getting this new job would be that big a deal, but like I have to sign up for benefits and stuff now. Like such a pain, like to take care of all of that.
otherwise I would. I know, like that's coming up really soon. I'm like, oh, today's the 17th. Oh my god, I have
Yeah.
like 2
Are you doing
days
the-
or less. I do what?
The Wonder
That's their videos.
I'm gonna try the
Everyone
other
in
one
this
as well
room.
because I think I can.
What do you mean?
Are you the streamer?
When I got the job at Vaughn,
Oh, I was wondering, I
it's
saw
not
your
that
phone.
bad.
Yeah,
Like the workload's
okay,
not bad.
So when
homework.
are you
Just
almost finished?
through at times, but then like I worked the morning shifts, so I got in and I went in today at 9 hours. So I actually didn't have to. Then at 10 o'clock,
I kind of
UPS,
worked it out. I was gonna
Postal
take
Service,
these
and everything else
and
came in, and
another
I was
part
like
and these two.
carrying
And I'm
around
so
hundreds of
glad, 'cause I had
pounds of
no idea
mail that
what
UCCS
these
is.
were.
Oh, okay.
I would have had
When do I
to
get to
get
draw?
on. So I think
So-
I'm gonna take everything.
Yes.
Me neither. Yeah, only because time at the library. I wish I did.
I wish.
And I
I
like
wish I
that
had
time.
like.
I love.
I have like I don't have a billable requirement. Now I don't.
And
Like my.
with Malvern.
Like if at
I
least
think-
I'm like,
I think
you know,
it's so
hitting
much
a certain
easier
number, like
just to
I
get
have a
your
goal for
script.
myself.
Right along.
I'm working 4 hours a day.
That Andrea's taking it right now. She's doing her CFA.
I haven't seen that.
I've been asking her a lot. But I've just
Can we
I'll put down,
include
and that's all I'm gonna do.
travel
I'm
to
gonna
and
take
from
2 more
some
classes.
jobs?
But then I'll walk
Well,
in
and
this
yeah,
part.
if I had gone to
I don't know.
I don't know, we're
could do
private
either, I guess. But I'm just gonna take an online class.
like building
I'll take a stupid education class. And then I'm just gonna.
Prefer that style, just not when you have to work.
Right? I looked at my bill today and I was like, what did I do today? Like, what have I done? Like,
The Air Force Academy. You work all day, I go, man, I worked 8 hours today. So I look back and I go, I only got like 3 hours of actual work done. A lot of it was just reading and writing for stuff.
I think the hardest thing
No.
is some teachers, it's very weird to start like you weekly and do whatever you want, and then other teachers. What?
Where's my time go?
Yeah, what
Let you do what you want, but they like have a me days like you comfortable. Like I haven't had that time recently. So I lose out on my sleep because I just need time to just be a vegetable.
No. I tried to. I finished up my weekly discussion question. Trying to get into this and read it a little bit more closely.
Anything.
But anyways, so
Yeah.
But if they were
Don't do anything on Tuesdays. Have class or anything? But like, the days that it seems like the days that I don't have class.
get through it.
Stuff
I know. I actually want to talk to
like,
them about
I'm like, okay, well now it's fine.
Right?
it rotates.
Poor Ryan,
I don't
getting
even-
his papers. This guy just
But I
seems
think
like the scum of the earth.
Unacceptable.
You see, you're getting more done than me
That's why
because I just I don't even watch a season of anything. I just sit there.
Yeah.
Like,
I know some people I would think.
I couldn't fall asleep until 12. And then, you know, I'd wake up every hour and turn. And I'm just like, good God, like every time I have to get something done, I.
Alright, we're just talking about.
Up to like almost 1 last night.
So,
Up
is there a lot of stuff to do for tomorrow?
Well, no, wait, actually. Yes, you do have to do a reaction.
Tomorrow?
what was the question for you guys?
Well, this is a different class.
Oh, okay.
I know, I keep doing that to him too. Like, he was like, oh, what do we have to do? And I was like, well, we have to do this. And he's
Like, why are we talking about Asia?
like, right. Fine, I'm sorry. No, we have a reaction paper to Cromer's, like, assessment of Egypt and why there is, like, a colony. It's really, really, like, almost funny because of it's so quintessentially.
How long
It's not awful, but it's not good either. It's yeah. And then these are like, this gives you some background on that, this journal, and then this review. Oh no, this is the Cleveland reading, which is only like 3 pages or 6 pages. It's just from this book. It's just to give some background on at the time. But yeah, his language. So
Everything makes sense that I sent, or?
Oh, when did you send it?
superiority,
send it today.
justifies
So, like,
it.
this is
3 or 4 days ago I sent it back.
from
Oh.
British.
Yeah, it is.
Check my email. I didn't see
Look,
it.
I
Maybe
can't drink
just-
black
Basically
coffee.
why it's.
You do not want me to drink black coffee.
There's people to
Yeah, make sure
please.
I get way too hyper.
We're talking
Civilize.
before Napoleon.
No, this is after Napoleon. So this one is.
Just made a couple corrections.
Oh, okay.
I'll resend it to you, but just to make sure. That
Yeah, yeah.
Oh,
Maybe,
let's see.
I think what probably happened is I just didn't see it. I don't know, for whatever reason.
Okay. Yeah.
It was published in
So,
1908. So
If I drink
but I
straight
think
coffee,
yeah,
like,
it
I
says
can't
it
sit down and I like
talks
shake
about
and
Send it in.
events from
I
like
go
the
crazy.
1870s on.
I get
So
those
much, quite a bit after Napoleon's invasion.
The day after I got it from
Like
New York.
really far after Napoleon.
Whatever day that was.
Yeah.
But yeah.
I get like that if I
Okay,
drink
no
coffee.
problem. And on there I
really-
also sent the, if you got more done, just send it back
Interesting.
again.
I was reading.
So.
Probably not. Probably just
Another time, yeah.
And it's doing again one again. Yeah, and she posted on about it on Blackboard too. Just said something like your reaction paper should focus on whatever. I think. I don't know. Let me pull up my syllabus real quick because I have been
Here, I have it right here.
no.
Yeah, he is.
Your reaction
years
paper
in
should
Madrid.
focus on the selection.
That's, yeah.
Try to relate.
Yeah, and that's
It totally
going very
is.
well.
I mean, it's all
Get
about
messages from him once in a while.
like this really interesting kind of warped.
Yeah.
Like he seems so rational and logical about his observations of Egyptians and why they are doing online.
Sure, that's fine. That's fine.
Figure out how
Yeah,
to
it's so interesting. Like he ties the
Yeah.
ideas of evolution,
Yeah.
like what it means to be ethnic.
Okay.
Egyptian. He's like there
Yeah,
is no
you bet.
Egyptian I don't know. It's like he has all these quotations from the Quran that I'm like, not actually. It's really funny. And anything that he says is like. I'm sure for your research.
Also, using stereotypes. It's really awesome how she's from Texas, but also from like Turkey and like I don't know. It's just you've never spent.
I know.
For about 2 seconds.
Someone remind me, what was the great fear? The great fear that ran through, yes, Cameron.
It was, I don't know, like in the summer or like maybe August or something of '89.
Right?
And I think people were scared of like roving bands of brigands and whatever.
Brigands,
through the country-
okay.
Through the countryside.
Okay.
And maybe also to counter-revolution by the nobles and have you. Would that be right?
Well, I think the counter-revolution comes later, but your first point about the brigands is very correct. What's a brigand? Okay, a thief. All right.
Bandit.
Okay.
Somebody serving their own interests.
Okay, all right. So bands of, vagabonds, criminals, thieves, good-for-nothings. And the idea was, and I know only so much history, but in the areas of history that I know, the idea that this would not only be common in many parts of France, but would have separate points of origin in these many parts of France just stuns me. That, you know, it is in effect a legend that the peasantry is you know, moving out to defend itself with, you know, pikes and axes and pitchforks and things like that on the basis of a rumor that thieves are about to come. Or in some cases, it's noblemen who are afraid of brigands in the form of peasant masses. I mean, perhaps in some cases they were the same. Think about that. That there could be a rumor spread that brigands are about to set upon a village. The peasants set out to defend themselves. A noble agent sees that and, you know, relays the rumor to the, well, in this case, not a rumor, to the nobleman that the peasants are about to move. Yes?
So I have a question,
Yeah.
if I may.
Yeah, sure.
Why is it that we set that section of anxiety apart from the rest of the anxiety that was felt through basically everyone else throughout the rest of the revolution? Like, why did we set how the peasants felt about this differently than how the people of Paris thought, oh, the Austrians are coming,
Yeah.
you know? And to me, I just don't understand why we call it the Great Fear when really the Great Fear lasted throughout the entire
Between the two historians, Tackett and McPhee, I would say that characterization hits McPhee more than it hits Tackett. Because Tackett does talk about the Great Fear, not of course at the length here, and does integrate this this idea of panic and anxiety, fear, from rural to urban. McPhee is talking about countryside. And there is, I mean, your question is well put. There is no solid intellectual reason. If the topic is to be panic during the French Revolution, there is no reason to set the countryside apart from the town, because panic was common to both. I mean, maybe we await the historian who will explain why it was that in 1789 large masses of people were so prone to panic, and why this panic took certain recognizable forms. The brigands are coming. The Austrians have invaded. You know, the criminals have been in the prisons have been. Some criminals in the prisons have been paid by the aristocrats to, when they break out, to come and slaughter law-abiding people. Those are recurrent patterns in the French Revolution, and why? I mean, it's a great question. Make this your life work.
Maybe not this area.
Okay.
Some other area.
Yeah, some other area of history.
Yeah.
That, you know, I mean, pardon? Plenty to choose from, right? And they all create their big questions, right? I tell you a big question I'm working on. I'm very interested in how it is that in the 1950s and 1960s, West Germany became involved with a set of practices that are known in German under the term Aufarbeitung der Vergangenheit, which means coming to terms with the past. I'm fascinated by that. Comparison with other societies suggests that not every society that has had, you know, tremendous crimes pinned on them undergo a process of self-reflection at all as intense as what West Germany underwent, which does not, I do not mean to romanticize West Germany or idealize it, but if you compare it with, say, East Germany, then, you know, there's a very distinct difference. I mean, people often compare this German manner of dealing with what Germans did in the Second World War with Japan, what the Japanese did in this, and how Germans, by and large, have just done a lot more in that direction than Japanese. Why? Why? I mean, every place I turn, and I've contributed some of this myself, you get a nice, details get etched in, the narrative is enlarged, but why do people do this? And why do Germans do it? And I've decided that when I can, you know, shove some things off my desk, I'm going to look very closely into the biographies of some of the people that I think were crucial in this, people you never would have heard of, because they played a large role in this movement. We're not, however famous political figures. I'm just going to look at them one by one and see why, what was the impetus to do this. I mean, the United States did not expect it from their ally, West Germany. We wanted an ally in the Cold War against the Soviet Union, and what they did or did not do about the Nazi past was their business. So it's why. And wherever you look in history, wherever you look, there's a question that just nobody knows the answer to. Yeah.
Oh, I was just regarding that. There was massive American military presence throughout Germany.
Yep.
And one of the things that they told us is they're tired of being asked why.
Who, the Germans?
Yes.
Yeah, yeah.
So I think some of it was almost forced on them.
Well, by 1950 or 1951, the Americans just completely withdrew from the issue, grew tired of it, and left it up to them. We conducted no more trials. We had what Germans undertook to deal with German crime, the German past, the Nazi past, was a matter of indifference. I mean, the first step, and a lot could be said about this, but the first step was in 1951 when the Germans entered into negotiations with the State of Israel to make what they called reparations to Israel on the fiction that Israel had been a state that represented the Jews who had suffered during the Holocaust, which is, of course, a clear fiction because Israel did not exist at the time of the Holocaust. And on that basis, I don't know how many millions and then billions of marks worth of goods were shifted to Israel. Also restitution of individuals. And by that time, the United States was completely indifferent to it. Do it if you must. There's a hand here. Whose was it? Yeah.
Well, if you want to compare Japan with Germany, I think it's also good to note that, at least in Europe, it doesn't seem like there was much hot war.
Much what?
Much hot war following World War II. Whereas in East Asia, you had like the Korean War and the Vietnam War.
Oh, I see.
So these people that were abused by the Japanese, the Koreans, the Chinese, the Vietnamese, became enemies after World War II.
Okay.
When China won the Civil War in '49, and when in 1950 Kim Il-sung invaded South Korea, then you have Ho Chi Minh in Vietnam. So these people became enemies, and it's easier to justify your war crimes against them or maybe brush them off when they aren't people you're supposed to cooperate with.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that may be. That may be. Yes. Oh, yeah.
The Japanese minister went to China and said, sorry for the trouble we've got.
Yeah. Yeah.
Trump says, no, thank you, you did us a favor. Because for China, it's like, oh, you got to write the national government. Never mind the rape magazine, never mind all of that. You brought us into power, so thank you.
Yeah, yeah. Why all that is fascinates me. I mean, I'm intrigued by your explanation of it, Cameron. I'd never thought of that. But, yeah. I mean, West Germans were certainly not the enemy of Israel. They were the enemy of Eastern Europe. And Eastern Europeans were not included in this spirit of reparation and restitution at first. So there may be something to this. That is why, why transfer any goods to Poland? They're communists. Why they're communist? Yeah. Anyway, back to our subject, the French Revolution. I mean, we could go through. I've got a long list of these passages here that just intrigue me about how this issue is handled. As I look ahead to the next chapter, it has to do with the refusal to pay compensation for the elimination of feudal dues. I mean, that just fascinates me. It fascinates me also that the peasants would simply look at the entire issue of of access to woods and take the matter into their own hands. That the royal domains passed into governmental authority of the National Assembly, and they were supposed to be off limits for peasants, but if the peasant needed to construct a shed or a fence, or if the peasant needed to needed wood for a fire, that it was there. It was there. I think you will have read, and it will, the I would say gradual increase of a willingness on the peasantry to do violence to seigneurs who stood in the way, who in some way insisted upon the payment of these feudal obligations. And that you will have seen all of that. If you turn though to chapter 4, that's without Christ and King, and that has to do in particular with this issue that came in with the civil constitution of the clergy, which entailed an oath that all clergy had to take in France. It was all bound up with the idea of the clergy as a servant of the state. So-and-so is a tax collector, so-and-so is a policeman, so-and-so is a priest. They're all servants of the state in one of it at one level or another. Now, from Tackett, we know that the politicians in Paris did not anticipate the upset that this would cause in the country at large. They looked at the Paris clergy. They thought that as far as they could tell, parish clergy that came to their attention in the National Assembly tended to side with the Third Estate against the first two. That is the establishment of a constitution, the rule of popular sovereignty. They seemed to be in favor of that, and yet they had trouble on their hands when they issued forth this civil constitution of the clergy, which entailed an oath that the clergy would serve the state of France. And in a case of doubt, it's not really the issue of, render unto Caesar what is Caesar's, render unto God what is God's. It wasn't really an issue of that. It's render unto Caesar what is Caesar's and let the rest go. You know what your faith says, administer it, period. That's it. What happened? What happened?
Didn't go over well.
Didn't go over well. I mean, conflict? There was conflict, about this. Some took the oath, some did not take the oath. What about local pressure? To take the oath, not to take the oath. You see evidence of that? I mean, how about you, Joe? What did you see in the way? I mean, a priest, has become a servant of the state. There's been an increase in pay for the priest, not so much for the bishop and archbishop, but for the parish priest has an income at a level, at least a cut above what he had.
Well, there was different reactions in different places.
Yeah.
There were a lot of towns where the people were offended by a priest who did take the oath.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And there were places where people actually supported the monarch.
Yeah.
And wanted their clergy, and they wanted nothing to do with the National Assembly.
Okay.
So the conflict really had to do with the imposition from the outside.
Okay. Yes.
And I think it was, someone correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure it was Descartes, and he laid forward a lot of different philosophies, one of them being that in civilization, the poorer classes, like the Third Estate in this book especially, they need religion. Now,
Rousseau said that.
Rousseau then.
Mm-hmm.
Voltaire too.
Whether you agree with their religion or not, they seem to believe that if you start to take that away from them, that's one of the only things that they truly depend upon in their lives. And it's kind of like the thought that if your life is horrible here on earth, it's okay because you've got heaven to back up on. And I think this is definitely, and I mean, it turned out to be an infringement upon them practicing religion in the long run.
Yes, it did. So, I mean, from the standpoint of the National Assembly, and the naivete here has to be recorded. They're not saying we're taking away your religion. They're saying all we want is a loyal priesthood, loyal to us, not to this international entity, the Catholic Church. I mean, that was the terms in which it was defended. Yes?
I find it interesting that this author provides a different aspect to it, as far as there was a lot of jobs that were involved with the church.
Yes.
And since some of these churches are closing, now it just emphasizes the unemployment issue. There, on page 81, I thought this was kind of interesting. It says, the enemies of the revolution are saying to the people that in the times that they dare to call happy, the worker did not lack work and the beggar received charity. So it's kind of, when it says, you know, the enemies of the revolution, people were kind of calling upon happier times when things were more peaceful, because
Right.
there was always the beggars. Now there's even more because of the unemployment, and at least before they could receive charity from the church.
Okay. Now, where's that statement coming from? This is in a city called Lyon, not Lyon, Lyon. These are this is some kind of, I guess, departmental government. And they're recording an opinion that is widespread, saying to the people that in the times that they dare to call happy, the worker did not lack work and the beggar received charity. So there's it articulates a nostalgia for the old regime. How widespread that nostalgia is, I cannot say, but it records it. Yes?
There's an upset of all authority. I mean, they have a king, king's gone, okay, you can kind of accept that. But the Pope is the head of their church.
Yep.
And now not only is the Pope not going to be the head, the king says, or the national assembly says, I'm going to appoint it, but we have Methodists taking over in many areas.
A Protestant.
Assembly,
Okay,
Protestants
yeah.
Who, this is really getting away from the Pope now. Why are you messing with our hierarchy? The Pope is supposed to be in charge of appointing, not you, and Methodists might start appointing who our ministers are.
Yeah, I mean, the head of the assembly for many months was Rabot Saint-Étienne, a Protestant. So, I mean, the world seemed quite topsy-turvy from a Catholic perspective. Whatever had been going well or poorly for the peasantry with regard to control of the land. Yes? Oh, I'm sorry. You're in line.
We're in line.
All right. Go ahead, Cameron, and then let's hear Amy.
Okay, I think another thing is that they didn't have enough time to build up a national identity yet.
Yeah.
Like, while nationalism was on the rise, there were still heavy amounts of local culture as opposed to a national culture, and it was more fractured than it would be now. So if you were to start exerting control over the church, which is sort of the only thing that holds this country together in many ways.
In some ways, yes.
In some ways, then I think it sort of leaves a vacuum that people don't want to deal with, because they don't really have a nation to turn to at that point.
That is a very good point, and I want to return to that in a minute. This idea that life was experienced for these people locally, and they were quite aware of Paris as the center of this new authority, but they always took it in the frame of reference of the locale. You know, you didn't think any further than the village church steeple. Your hand had been up.
So yeah, and actually to kind of tie a lot of these together, the feeling I got from McPhee is that he paints this picture of how enmeshed religion and society were, local society were, that it really is difficult to disentangle the two.
Yeah.
And to understand that if there's a conflict on the church level, there's a conflict on the local level.
Yeah.
And it affected everybody's daily lives in so many different ways.
That's a good point. That's a good point. I mean, both these comments have really drawn attention to the idea that the nation is an extremely vague concept for masses of French who think in local and not national terms. Yes?
That's what I was going to say, is that the individual communities, especially in places where they spoke other languages,
Occitan,
did not
for example.
identify
German.
with the national French identity. And it was having the National Assembly reach in and exert control in their communities through the imposition on clergy
Good point.
It really ticked them off.
Good point. That's a good point. You know, you're all, I think, centering on this idea that the nation is an extreme abstraction from the standpoint of rural France. You know, the king, the realm, the assembly, I mean, those pieces of information are there. But this idea that life needs to be centered in those things awaits the future. And some would say still awaits the future. You know, we can't be too complacent about this issue of nationalism. I mean, in effect, if today a change like this would be explained in terms of the big picture, well, a peasant in 1789 could say, what exactly is the big picture? And why would they not think that way? Why would they not think that way? You point to the, I mean, there was the survey of language that sent back that some, I can't remember, some minuscule percentage of French were able to write French and read French. And in many areas, spoken French was distinctly the second language, and people pulled it off with difficulty, if at all. So to some extent, there's a presumption from Paris about a national identity that simply does not exist. Let me ask you a question. There are passages here that put me to thinking. This is at the bottom of 81, the same page you drew attention to a moment ago, Erica. Timothy Tackett, all right, our friend from the past, has stressed that one of the critical determinants of the parish clergy's response to the civil constitution of the clergy was the attitude of their parishioners. All right, so the parishioners pushed this way, pushed that way. Of course, this was not always the case. In Aumôy, le Davien was the priest refused the oath, was besieged by his parishioners in his presbytery, and had to flee to Soissons. Okay, so the pressure is coming the other way. Take the oath, take the oath. And the next, in Mortagne, a town in the south of the department of the Aune, the National Guard pressured parish priests to take the revolutionary oath, arriving with guns and swords. Okay, so in one case, pressure is exerted, the priest refuses and departs. In the other case, pressure is exerted and the priest takes the oath. Or priests, plural. Okay, now, that didn't happen everywhere. I mean, you pointed out, Joe, that this differs from place to place. There are even regional patterns for whatever reason. This to me is a puzzle. Why was the west of France so full of refractory priests? Why Alsace so full of? Why the Massif Central? Why? I don't know. I don't know why. And why in other regions was there more acceptance of this? I have no idea. But in any case, there are differences, village to village, region to region. In the passages just read, I started to wonder, who is this? Who's exerting this influence in favor of the... I tried to visualize this as a part of visual life. Who is exerting this influence upon the priest to take an oath that perhaps the priest would not? Well, in these cases, the priest, in one case, did not take, and in the other, perhaps would not have taken without this influence. And how do you picture this? I mean, who is the arm of the revolution at village level? Robespierre's never been there. Brissot doesn't know the name of this place. Who's doing this?
He talks about the National Guard having a presence
All right.
there.
That's important. I think the second example, we're reminded that in this rudimentary authority that comes to municipalities in general, there is a National Guard, and they become, so to speak, the local Jacobins. And and I would assume that that's a more general phenomenon. Yes?
I had another question.
Yeah.
That, who is the one that is actually, like when the king gets executed and when the king is taken out of power, who is the one that's actually doing that? Because he is the king, so.
Well, he's removed from power by the assembly and by all of these clubs and neighborhood sections and so forth in Paris, 10th of August 1792. I mean, it's hard to pin that on one particular group because it's all caught up with this, Parisian urban mass that is turned against him. He's taken, I believe, on the authority of the Paris municipal government, which of course is in the hand of the sans-culottes, in the hand of these sectional authorities, and put in prison. A republic is proclaimed, elections are held, and when the convention meets on September the 20th, 1792, France is just no longer a monarchy. It's a republic, having been decided in Paris by these various groups. A question to you. However you gauge sympathy for the church as of, let's say, 1791, how do you gauge sympathy for the king? I mean, would you think, Dune, that the king would enjoy that as the value as the stock of the church rose in public esteem, which it clearly did after the civil constitution of the clergy, not universally, but in many places. Did the stock of the king, was it bound to rise with it? Was the villager bound to the idea that church and king are pretty much the same thing?
Well, I think it depends if the church considers themselves loyal to the king or loyal to...
Okay. Well, the church is more raising the issue of Rome. That is, the complaint here it has to do with the idea that this all-important spiritual mission is being broken. I mean, one would have to look. I mean, that's a delicate question, isn't it? And I think where the counter-revolution was being fought, but that wasn't most places. Anger at the clergy for taking the oath was more widespread than counter-revolution. In counter-revolutionary areas, I have no idea that the banner of the king was being held aloft. In other areas, I don't know. That's my question. I don't know. Yeah.
So, just thinking back throughout history, Rome usually has a pretty significant reaction to events such as this. Do you know?
You mean the papacy?
Yes.
That Rome? Okay,
yes.
yeah.
Do you know what they did in particular about this? Like,
they were furious and threatened excommunication.
I mean,
they didn't mince words.
Yes. But there was no... I mean, I guess that was probably just about it.
Yeah, I mean, the papacy did not feel that it had to accommodate the decree of a revolutionary government in France.
Yeah.
I mean, think of it, to think of this in kind of the history of political theory, for many writers, the old regime consisted of church, nobility, and king in a kind of tremendous alliance. It's just that everywhere where the peasantry protested the imposition of the civil constitution of the clergy, I'm not sure that the sympathy for the church extended to either the nobleman or to the king. I mean, you can say, well, a picture is... I mean, historians have to be as skeptical of pictures as they are of words. So I'm not going to say that what you see on page 89 is the picture is worth 1,000 words. But look at that. Look at that. And the translation you'll find there on page 88. This is a peasant holding on to Louis as a pig, and says, "I ruined myself to fatten him up. Now I don't know what to do with him." All right? And they didn't know what to do with him because he had not only tried to escape and been caught, but even after that, he had given an oath to the Constitution and had no intention of upholding that oath. So, I mean, I put before you as an hypothesis that sympathy for the church, that is for non-juring priests, those who did not take the oath, ran deeper than sympathy for the king. And the evidence that I give is I think only partial, and that is there's a lot more evidence of upset about the issue of the civil constitution of the clergy than there is about the ups and downs of Louis XVI. And as far as regret over what happened to the nobility, I think you look long and hard for much of that. Yes?
Part of that had to do with how long it took for something to happen to the king. I mean, they brought him back and he kind of sat there for a while. I think.
Yeah.
Had they executed him right away when they captured him, I think people would have said, "Oh, he just killed." But they kind of just became, by lack of doing anything with or to him, it's just kind of.
Yeah.
Whatever. I guess we don't need you because we're running along just fine.
Well, that's a point. That's a point. That the issue was allowed to drift. And drifting, I'm not sure that anyone thought this out ahead of time, but drifting, the king just lost importance. Yes?
It didn't, after he drew his support for the Constitution the second time, after he had run away and been caught and everything, Jacobins actually held a tribunal to decide his execution, didn't they?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So, I mean, when he failed to support the Constitution after declaring that he would, I think they just decided it was time to be done with him.
Right, right. And that, of course, then had shockwaves because the Girondins, this other faction in the convention, staked out the opposite position. Punishment, yes. Execution, no. And that was read then as further evidence against them as these revelations came out that various Girondin politicians had been in contact with Louis. And, which if you think about it, was quite proper as long as a constitutional monarchy existed. But this was twisted in such a way as to look like treason. So, yeah, that was a very, very dicey issue. But I think the king's stock had fallen lower than the church's by a long way. By a long way. What about this idea that, and I think we can maybe close with this idea, that no matter how the peasants stood on a given issue, and probably they didn't always stand on issues at all. This was not a time when people wore their political opinion on their sleeve. There was no way to mobilize public opinion in that way. In regions, yes. I mean, where counter-revolution took root, yes, there was on a regional level an ability to draw the peasants behind some kind of counter-revolutionary army. But for the most part, what we've said so far about locality by locality by locality by locality concerns also the resentment that begins to be felt toward Paris. There was no basis on which to organize it. There's no basis on which to keep people mobilized as some kind of, they never joined the counter-revolution. That seemed as bizarre to them as everything else, no doubt. What about this idea that McPhee keeps coming back at us with? It doesn't matter how frustrated they were with, let's say, taxes. It doesn't matter how frustrated they were with the slow progress on this issue of who controls the land and who compensates whom. Do we need to make compensation or not? It doesn't matter what they thought about the clergy. Their lives were being changed from the ground up anyway. How does that sit with you? What is McPhee trying to get at? Yeah.
I feel like there's a transformative change that's happening. I mean,
Okay.
Even talking about the issues of identity, of how this peasant, okay, so no matter how frustrated they're getting or how they act out or how they respond,
Yeah.
there's still something that's being imposed on a transformative level that
Okay.
they are never going to go back to the way the life was
Okay.
before.
Okay. I mean, that's a good point. Let's just take the fact that politics has interfered with their lives. Maybe they don't think about it every day, but it's interfered with their lives. Well, before 1789, if someone said, let's have a political argument, They would have said, what? What exactly is a political argument? Brian and then Erica.
I'm kind of like McPhee, and I was looking forward to this one. I think we talked about. I think the rural people are more so for freedom than anything else. We want to be left alone. We want a revolution. We want ours. We're not going to tell you how to live your life. Whereas I felt the Parisians, it's constantly, we're in charge now. We're going to run. We're in charge. You're going to do what we say. We're in charge. And they never got that from the rural people. They were more so, yes, we might break the law and go to the forest, but we're not going to go to Paris and make them. We're not going to go to McDonald's. It comes back to the whole our house, our town. We're only concerned about our town.
Yeah.
They seem more genuine, more, I'm living my life day to day. How does this affect day to day?
Yeah. I mean, I'm interested. I have to look back at the passages where Tackett dealt with that issue, because he points out that some of the effect from Paris, perhaps unintended, was decentralization of power. That is, this idea, I mean, I can tell you in the part of Germany where I lived and where I worked that had been France, I mean, there was a tenacious effort throughout the 19th century to maintain the French system of municipal government, because it so vested power in local people and kept local landowners out of influence. And this works all the way up into the 1840s, in half a century into that part of Germany, that having received it, they were loath to give it up. Likewise, in every one of these municipalities, something has been established that is owed to Paris, but that they don't, but that does not require of them that they march in line with Paris. It's very paradoxical. And if the question has to be put, are they for the revolution or against it, it becomes an imponderable. Because there is this transformation, and to some extent, it either benefits them or they can make it benefit them. Yeah?
I think some of it is immediacy. At one point, I think it's he that said...
Oh, closer to the mic, please do.
It took as much as 2 weeks for anything that happened to Paris to
Yeah.
get to the outer...
Yeah.
And we think in terms of, I log onto the internet and I see that Obama blew his nose 2 minutes ago. I mean,
Yeah.
it's just not that way.
No, it's not
They're
that way.
isolated from what's going on in Paris in many ways.
Yeah. And how Paris is going to enforce a decree is an open question. I mean, Paris is able to fight against the counter-revolution. We see that. But in part because the counter-revolution was so limited in territorial scope. But how's Paris going to force anyone to... When that decree came out to... What was it? It was the corvée, the labor tax had to be compensated at 20 times its value. 20 times its... And I think the banalités, or it's the other way around, at 25 times their annual... No one was going to do that. There's no basis to force them to do that. I mean, if you think about it, there's a lot more evidence here about peasantry siding with the church than peasantry siding with the seigneur. There's evidence increasingly of violence against the seigneur of one kind or another, including, beheadings and all kinds of violent action against the Lord. Well, once you've done that, you've crossed the bridge of no return. And that's a way of talking about the change that the peasantry has undergone, and why the bridge back to the old regime can never be the bridge that they crossed to begin with. Church, yes. Noblemen, no. I was struck by something else in this book, and that is on this environmental theme. There were touches of environmental awareness in these peasant grievances in 1789, erosion. Well, when they had the chance, they just went and took wood. And that, I don't mean that as a sort of slam at them. I just mean to say resources were so scarce, control of resources was so urgent, the need for wood so pressing, that You know, it's very much like today when environmentalists say, well, you know, we need to get what used to be called the third world online with environmental initiatives, and they're often in no position to join those initiatives. You know, it depends on, I mean, environmentalism is in a way a luxury. Yeah.
Relative to that issue, it seemed like it was the landowners who were concerned about the effects of erosion and that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Yeah.
Peasants just wanted that piece of wood.
Yeah. It's quite something. Yeah.
Well, the erosion of the soil affected everybody because there was a depletion of the soil. It had affect the farm animals, growing crops, food. I mean, it kind of has a trickle-down effect.
It does indeed.
He really described it very well, yeah. Like, he just described that if they didn't have wood, they would sometimes use hay, you know, or scraps, and then those scraps wouldn't go to the cows, and then the cows would produce manure, and then the manure wouldn't be put on the field, and I mean, it just led to more problems finding, you know, wheat for bread and other problems at the time.
I mean, there's a certain spoiling of the land going on. And it seems hard to stave off. There's no authority to stave it off. There's no capacity to deal with the problems that lead to it to begin with. It's quite remarkable. How many of you have ever traveled in France? Yeah? So you know, several of you. I mean, where were you, Edmund? Where were you in France? In Paris, okay. You look around out in the countryside at all?
A little bit of the countryside.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I haven't been everywhere, but parts I've been have been just gorgeous. How about you, Erica? Have you ever been in the French countryside?
Fortunately, no, just Paris.
Just Paris, okay. See that? Yeah, Paris is this big magnet. But this summer, I was on a research trip. I wanted to spend there are just certain definite things I wanted to do in France. And I wanted to go to Verdun, which is the site of the Great Battle. And well, as you can see, it was the site of a great battle also in 1792, but the site of the Great Battle in 1916 in the First World War, because I've talked about it and taught it, and I've never been there, and I've never seen all of these sites. Well, one of the things that you see in Verdun is, you say the fortress of Verdun, and I pictured kind of a city, you know, with fortifications nearby. They're about, you know, some of these fortifications reach about 40 or 50 kilometers north and east of the city in anticipation of where the Germans would attack in 1916. It's a huge, I mean, the fortress of Verdun is a huge series of forts and other installations of one kind or another. It's just a fabulous, I mean, you take a bus tour and you see this and you see that. But the night I got there, you know, everything was just all fouled up with my train travel that night. And I got to about 30 kilometers from Verdun, and I thought, you know, I'm in this absolutely rural train station where people are leaving, and I think, I mean, in my travels when I was young, I used to spend the night in bus stations and trains. I thought, I'm too old to do this. But a man stepped forward and he said, I'm going to Verdun. He took me along. And it is a gorgeous countryside. I mean, you can't imagine that, what are we talking about, 230 years ago, there would be this depredation of the countryside, of the country, of the land. It's just, you know, one you know, set of beautiful, you know, fields after another. You just can't imagine it. I mean, France is so, by everything I've ever experienced, it's just so gorgeous and lush and fertile. And but back here, I mean, there must have been, I mean, you know, there must have been, you know, you mentioned, you know, lower grain yields, less manure, the whole, you know, the whole business of, you know, the ruin of agriculture. There must have been terrible yields, more hunger, more turmoil. You know, we got into this thing from hunger in part in 1789. I guess the French Revolution makes you wonder, if you begin to plan these great, you know, actions, where they will lead. I don't mean that as an apology for Louis XVI or the nobility of the old regime, or, you know, land ownership by the Catholic Church or anything of the kind. It's just
Consequences.
yeah, and yeah, I mean that could be the subtitle of every book we've seen so far. Yeah. I mean, I'm sure that even in the age when revolutionaries were professional, you know, the Castros, the Ho Chi Minhs, and so forth, that a lot of what happened to them they didn't intend. And how much less would these people who weren't revolutionaries to begin with be able to lay firm plans that people acted upon? My word. My word. Anyway, let's call it a day. Let's call it a day. You're a good group. You've I hope you've gotten your you know, your comments back from your referee, your student referee, and that you can go about the business of revision now of that first paper, and then it will all hit me like an avalanche. I would like hard copy, and remember, you staple the hard, like Joe did it here. You staple the hard copy next with the comments and with the original copy, so I can track the development of this thing. And remember, your referee has put work into this. That doesn't mean that you need to slavishly do everything that the person says, you know? But it does mean that I think that you should at least sit down and consider if there isn't an issue and see how you might want to address the issue. Yeah? Let me see what I said on the syllabus, and I can give you a better answer. What did I say? Assignments include, yeah, I mean, in this case, the 2 copies go later when you're turning things in to me and to Andrea, the writing fellow. This one, first draft, referee comments, plus final draft, and that's what you need to turn in. 3 items, 1 copy of each, stapled together, basta. Okay? Okay, very good, very good. More peasantry next week. So take a drive in El Paso County, east, to get ready.
You can go down to Browers too. It's not
It seems like I remember that Germany, old buildings, old cars, they don't just pile up. You've got to take them down and get them out. You know,
Yeah.
Europe, you don't drive around and see the refrigerator laying out. I think that's part of why it's so pretty.
Yeah, it is. It's very pretty, it's like Wisconsin writ large.
Well, around, I was in the Eiffel. You drive the highways through there, and the whole, I say mountain, hillsides would be covered with flowers. And that was
Yeah,
just,
yeah.
I loved it.
Yeah, the Eiffel is out of this world.
Alright,
Okay, now.
question that's unrelated to our class, so
Unrelated to the class. Okay, and then you'll tell me again about, it's your referee that I need to be in touch with.
No, I got my paper back. I sent her my paper, and
Okay.
I got my paper back, but she was supposed to send me her paper, and
Well, they're not the same person.
no, I know.
You're-
I know,
you-
a different,
the person-
yeah, a different person. I know it's 2 different persons. My person.
Just a
is-
second.
I sent my paper to Cassie.
Yeah, Cassie. Okay.
And she already sent mine back, so
Mhm.
my paper's fine. But
Yeah.
whoever